nearly 250 years, the United States Army has stood watch. It fought not only to defend a country, but to define one. It built bridges in peacetime and stormed beaches in war. It's trained for the world that exists and the world that might come next. From Lexington and Concord to Kabul and Kuwait, from muddy World War II trenches to electronic drone warfare. This story is more than one of war. It's one of service, sacrifice, and constant reinvention. This is Long History Short. Today, we tell the story of the U.S. Army from 1775 to now. It began before there was a country. On June 14th, 1775, the Continental Congress created the Continental Army, and the very next day they handed command to George Washington. For him, it wasn't a title, it was a duty. Washington's army, known as the Regulars, was underfed, undertrained, and underpaid, but it held. From Bunker Hill to Valley Forge to Saratoga to Yorktown, the Army became the spine of the Revolution. The Regulars faced the most powerful empire on Earth and won. Victory over the British Empire came not through brute force, but through willpower, French support, and a strategy of delay, opportunity, and hope. This was a war of endurance, and the U.S. Army endured. But perhaps the Army's greatest early moment came not in battle, but in silence. In 1783, George Washington walked into a room of frustrated, unpaid officers, took out his glasses, and reminded them of what they'd fought for. Then, he gave up power. That one act, subordinating military to civilian rule, defined the Army's identity more than any victory. After independence, the regular army nearly disappeared. The founders feared that a standing army could threaten freedom. But soon, conflict returned, with native nations on the frontier and with Britain again in 1812. The most important lesson came from President James Madison, who watched militia forces crumble and said, "I could never have believed so great a difference between regular troops and militia forces, until I saw it with my own eyes." The Army wasn't just a backup plan anymore, it was a necessity. The decades after 1815, with the border with Canada demilitarized and the U.S. at peace with Europe, the Army became a tool of American expansion. Soldiers built roads, manned forts, and enforced treaties, but they also fought brutal wars against native nations as settlers pushed west. And then came Mexico. In 1846, the United States declared war, driven by manifest destiny and the promise of land. The Army's strategy? 3 prongs: invade the North, secure the West, strike the capital. The critical blow came with General Winfield Scott's amphibious landing at Vera Cruz, a bold move, rarely seen at the time. From there, his troops marched to Mexico City, taking the fight to the heart of the enemy. It worked, and with it, the U.S. gained vast territory: California, New Mexico, Arizona, and security over Texas. The early Army wasn't just defending borders, it was defining them. But the celebration didn't last long, because just over a decade later, the country split. The most painful chapter in American history began. The Army that once fought for independence now fought for unity. Over 4 bloody years, the Army transformed. It grew in size, in complexity, in technology. Hot air balloons provided aerial reconnaissance. Triage systems and battlefield medicine changed how soldiers healed. Repeating rifles multiplied firepower and changed how soldiers died. More Americans died in the Civil War than in any other conflict. But from the blood came transformation, planting the seeds of a modern army. The Civil War redefined the Army's purpose, not just to defend a country, but to preserve what it stood for. After After the Civil War, soldiers occupied southern towns, protected freedmen, and enforced new federal laws in what was called Reconstruction. It was one of the Army's most complex roles, act as both shield and scalpel, protecting peace while navigating outrage. But that era ended in 1877. The troops pulled out. The Army had tried to help heal, but Congress and compromise would write a different ending. So the Army turned west. The Army fought the Indian Wars. For the first time ever, the primary adversary of the United States was an ill-defined, elusive enemy whose way of life was incompatible with U.S. objectives. How to fight this type of enemy is still a hard lesson the Army is still trying to learn. After the Indian Wars, by 1898, the Army wasn't just looking west, it was looking overseas. It fought and won a war with Spain and gained a new sphere of influence in Cuba, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. The Army had transformed from frontier force to global power, but found that power challenged by Mexico, China, and beyond. And by 1917, the biggest stage yet awaited. When the U.S. entered World War I, the Army wasn't ready. It became ready fast. The Army ballooned from under 200,000 to nearly 4 million. It was a logistical miracle, one built by planners, engineers, and the will of a nation. And for the first time, Americans fought and died in Europe, etching their names in monuments across the continent. Between the wars, the Army shrank again, but history wasn't done. In 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. The Army exploded in size, and the largest mobilization in U.S. history began. The Army grew from 200,000 to over 8 million. This wasn't the old frontier force. It was factories, convoys, code breakers. It was boots on beaches and bombs in the sky. It was a war fought in North Africa, Europe, the Pacific. They liberated concentration camps. They helped end fascism. The U.S. Army of World War II became the largest and most capable force the world had ever seen. Leaders and heroes became household names. Veterans remade their lives through education. But when the war ended, new ones began. Post-World War II, the Army stayed large, forward deployed across the globe. The Cold War had begun. In Korea and Vietnam, the Army fought proxy wars to stop the spread of communism. Victory was elusive. The cost, high, lessons were learned in blood. The Army also led contingency operations in Grenada, Dominican Republic, and Panama, policing bad actors on its side of the globe. Back home, the Army integrated. African American soldiers who had fought abroad returned to demand equality. Women, too, began expanding their roles. The Cold War era was one of nuclear readiness, civil unrest, and technological transformation. Through it all, the Army stood watch. In 1991, the First Gulf War proved the Army's unmatched capability in modern combat. It led to forays into other regional conflicts: Somalia, Haiti, the Balkans. These were not full-scale wars, but they were real missions, real danger, real lives. They tested a post-Cold War Army's ability to adapt, to be warriors one day, diplomats the next, and to operate in a world without clear lines. But on September 11th, the mission changed. The Army deployed to Afghanistan, then Iraq. For 20 years, soldiers fought insurgencies, trained allies, built infrastructure. The Army transformed from traditional warfare to fighting an idea: terrorism. This was no longer defense of territory. It was pursuit of shadowy networks across unstable nations. This was a new kind of battlefield: urban, asymmetric, unending. Through rotations, deployments, and sacrifice, the Army almost broke, but endured. Today, the Army faces new domains and challenges: cyber, space, climate, drones. But the core remains the same: people. Roughly 450,000 active duty soldiers, another 200,000 in the reserves. They train in jungles, deserts, cities, and code. It remains ready for conflict, but is also focused on prevention, disaster relief, and innovation. And while their missions shift, their purpose does not: to protect and serve the nation, even when the battlefield isn't obvious, not for glory, but for duty, not to conquer, but to serve. From 1775 to today, the story of the U.S. Army is the story of America, its trials, its ideals, and its relentless drive forward. Thank you for watching. For more clear, compelling stories, subscribe to Long History Short, your shortcut to the whole story.